Hi, everybody. And once again, I'm joining all the previous speakers in thanking the World Organization for bringing up this important issue as part of this conference. I'm very happy to have my very good friend Andreas with me over here. Basically, we discussed and we said, let's have it as a kind of a chimney discussion, fireplace discussion. So let's imagine there is a fireplace and a good glass of wine, only you dressed like an Israeli chimney discussion, so I came like a Swiss one.
Yes, I was reading this morning the dress code, and I said, okay, business. And I said, okay, in the Israeli context, that's business enough, but I forgot we are in...
All right. And really, I mean, what we would like to discuss is the investor's perspective. We heard many good things about the entrepreneurs and, of course, the Herzl vision about impact. And now it's about time to unlock a little bit the paradigm around investors' perspective. I came across impact investments, 6 or 7 years ago when I was at UBS. And I got a phone call from Andreas to say that the global CEO of UBS met Sir Ronald Cohen in Davos. And UBS decided to respond to the challenge of raising funds for the first ever social bond in Israel to deal with diabetes. And since then, I'm fascinated by this issue and I'm involved in different directions. Now, how did you come across some impact?
I started from the other side of the spectrum. Although I had a finance background, I started sort of on the grant-making side, the philanthropy side, and then fairly early on I saw that investment and business can be a much better and sort of more efficient way of allocating scarce resources. In the beginning, I thought only for private goods, and then, once Sir Ronald Cohen came up with the innovation of social impact bonds, I said, hey, you can use that also in common goods. So, voila. And since then, I think I've deployed over 2 billion, either directly or through funds in impactful companies. I hope we get to that later. Both financial first, as well as sort of impact first, and maybe we can talk about the dichotomy later. And I would also like to highlight my engagement also with Keren Hayesot and the fund where I sit on the impact board.
Good, great. So let's start to discuss about impact investments. And I found many times when I am talking to investors, there is still a lot of confusion, I must say, definitely in Israel, about different impact parameters or parts. I mean, people are confusing between ESG and impact investments and social businesses. So how do you see this? Can you please?
Yes. Maybe for the benefit of all, and I'm seeing the time running out here, so I think we have to talk fast. So for the benefit of all, ESG is basically sort of a compliance-driven approach where you go through predefined checklists of what you can and what you can't do. Now, I think the similarity or sort of the commonality with impact investing is that both want to, at the end of the day, achieve good. The way I look at it is ESG resembles more a religion, right? There's just one way of doing it. With little room for nuance, but also the advantage of doing it at very great scale. Whereas impact investing resembles more political parties, right? So you all want to do good, but there are different ways of, you're competing in your approaches. How do you look at it?
Well, well, I mean, in a way, ESG is some kind of a standard of how not to do things. I mean, it's more negative. It's more to say to companies, and by the way, I mean ESG, ecological, social, and governance standards in the world are well established now. Okay, and it's basically telling companies, I mean, how they have to run their regular business. It's not to shift their business from what they are doing. They can carry on manufacturing shoes, but under certain standards. And what I like, what has been happening in the world in the last, I would say, anything between 5 to 10 years, is that financial institutions, such as UBS, such as BlackRock, okay, basically told investors, or the corporates, if you want us to invest in your equity, in your stock, then you have to meet certain ESG standards. And suddenly, I mean, every corporate that is traded in any stock exchange has to meet certain standards of ESG in order to comply with the requirements of financial institutions. I mean, even stock exchanges have started to introduce ESG account reporting measurements. And that's to me, it's a very positive trend that, I mean, because people talked about scalability. I mean, no doubt that this will create scalability. But I mean, I think also on the impact investment, there is a differentiation between a company or entrepreneurships that their product or service will make the difference. And we had some very good example just a few minutes ago. And there are some companies that, while they're doing different things, and I'll give you a good example, I mean, they're achieving an impact. I mean, for example, I'm involved in Israel it will be very interesting for the Swiss and French colleagues over here, growing truffles on the Golan Heights. I mean, can you imagine? Israelis are growing truffles on the Golan Heights. So, I mean, I'm saying always that the world can live without truffles, right? But while we are growing truffles, we actually plant trees. We're using 10% of the water that we are using in other plantations. And most importantly, I mean, to me, this is supporting of the community of the farmers on the Golan Heights that otherwise cannot actually survive from being farmers. So this is a good example where it's not an impact investment in, you know, the regular sense of it, but we are achieving a lot of impact while we are doing this business.
Depending what you want to achieve as an investor, right? So let me pick up on a point that Alina was referring to before when she was running us through the definitions. So intentionality seems to play sort of a very important role in impact investing. And since years, we've always been sort of grasping, you know, what does it really mean? It's not really sort of a hard-coded definition. So how do you look at the intentionality question?
Intentionality. Actually, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right. We always when we talk about impact investment, we always talked about the intentionality of the entrepreneur, of the company. And this is, I believe, because a few years down the road, I mean, the impact world was relatively small. The deal flow was not massive. And investors look at impact investment as one pot, okay? Exactly. While today, with the development and the ecosystem of impact investments, investors can come up with their own intentionality. They can define whether they want to go into agrotech, into food tech, into life science or climate. So they can actually define. I mean, like very much, and I know that you've been involved in that, in philanthropy. Okay, when you approach an investor and you want to advise them about philanthropy, the first thing that you ask them to do, what is your vision? What is your philanthropic vision? And we see more and more investors now talking about their impact vision? How do they actually see the impact implemented within their own wealth? How do you perceive it?
I would absolutely concur, and I think it's not mutually exclusive, right? You need the drive. I think in any due diligence you do in a company, right? You want to see a certain drive and sort of genuine conviction of the team, right? And you want them to see their ethical fiber. At the same time, I have to say I've sat on so many boards as an impact investor, and very often sort of with shareholders or other sort of board members who were not impact investors, right? So I think you can have very different views and very different expectations towards the company. So I think it's a dialectic process. It requires both the entrepreneur, but I think it also requires the investor, who also tells then afterwards what the metrics should be.
Which brings us to the next point, which is the measurement. And I know that in the impact investment world, measuring the impact was quite a difficult topic. And I think that the pendulum moved from, coming up with very, very complicated and complex models, okay, that, by the way, put a lot of onerous on the entrepreneurs, to the extent that some of them were even reluctant to go into the impact world and introduce their entrepreneurship to impact investors, because all the onerous were on their shoulders. Yeah. So question to you, how do you see the measurement moving? Is it more relaxed now? And who is actually have the duty to come up with the measurement model? Is it the investors or other entrepreneurs?
Yes, I think, so first of all, we've seen sort of a little bit of a bifurcation. On the one side, we see, what we touched upon before, sort of a much sort of standardization, ESG, right? But also what Alina was alluding to before on sort of bridges methodologies. You just try to bring in some sort of basic taxonomies on how you look at things, how you call things. But building on the previous discussion, I think as an investor, you should have sort of very specific views, sort of a transmission mechanism on how you want to achieve good, and that should be reflected also in what you ask from the company to deliver as metrics. Now, in my view, this should be very closely linked to what the company is actually doing. So it should be part of the operational metrics, and hence not create too much it should not be a tax on the activities. We're in Switzerland, so I'm very much sort of cognizant of time.
It's an Israeli
but it's okay, good.
So we can carry on. I think. There is only one very important topic that we need to cover, but which is whether impact investment. What is more important, the impact side or the commercial side?
What do you think?
What I think. Okay, so I think that once again, coming back, impact investment was perceived as an asset class. And there were a lot of discussions whether you should give up return because you are achieving impact, but then how do you measure the financial aspect of this impact? Or you are asking sometimes, and I think we had this discussion before, when you go to impact investment, maybe you are taking as an investor a higher risk, and therefore you are seeking even a higher return. I think today impact investment, and that's a good tip for a lot of the entrepreneurs, more and more is perceived integrated into the investment world. So you can invest in impact investments as part of a VC, a venture capital, in a startup, early stage, growth stage, or whatever, and yet it's an impact investment, or in a private equity, or as a debt instrument, okay? So really, whether you want the financial bottom line or impact bottom line depends a lot on the kind of investment that you're making. How do you as an investor look at it?
Look, I mean, I've made now numerous times the experience that if you look at carefully at the impact, it is not mutually exclusive with the commercial side at all. Quite the opposite. I'll give you an example. A year and a half ago, I had an investment that I brought forward to my investment committee in EdTech in China. It was one of the upcoming unicorns. It went through, everybody was fully excited, and then I brought it to my impact committee, sort of two different committees, and they said, well, we're not really sure, and it sort of spurs the competition and the stress of the kids. Is this really where we want to invest money? So the investment was declined. A year later, exactly for the same reason, the government of China, and now I'm not going into the politics of it, but for similar reasons that the impact committee had declined it, basically, forbade all sort of ed tech companies in China. So it saved us losing a lot of money. And I have numerous of these examples where it gives you sort of a different angle, sort of a different perspective.
Right.
On how to look at investments. So I think actually it's enriching. Now, if we are talking about losing money, okay, let's unpack a bad investment, right? It can be either unintentional, right? Then it was just a bad investment, or it was intentional. If it was intentional,
yep,
it's a concessionary investment, what we call in the impact space sort of a concessionary investment, right? And that can be for multiple reasons, right? It can be because your cost of operations are too high, or the reporting costs a lot of money. So I think that's one category. The other category is because you go into markets that are sort of inherently more risky, and the risk is not appropriately priced. Right. I mean, this would be sort of development finance institutions, or as many foundations do and charities, you go and you take an alternative to philanthropy and try to use investments as such.
Which is, yeah, we need to finish, but I mean, I must end up, like many of us, I mean, I reread Alt Neuland just before we came over here.
So did I.
Yeah, I know. And there is a chapter, an interesting one, talking about the financial model of the new society. The new society is the Ethiopia country or society of Jews in Israel in the Alt Neuland, and he actually describes how the financial model is going to work. And it's fascinating because this is an impact investment. He's talking about an equity company in London raising money through equity IPO, really in those many words, in order to support buying the lands in Israel and cause the Jews from the diaspora immigrate to Israel, and then creating a cooperative of farmers in Israel. This equity company will give a loan to the cooperative that will pay it back with a loan, okay? But it's a convertible loan, because at some stage, if the cooperative is successful, it can buy back the equity from the equity company. Can you imagine? He came up with this in 1900s.
Amazing. Kobi, I'm sitting in the direction, get all the signals. You don't get on any of those.
Okay, thank you very much.
but our real fire chats are longer.
Exactly. Bye-bye, thank you.